I'll just welcome everyone to Core Volunteer Training. It's a program created to support our volunteers, especially newer ones, connect with each other around the larger world and empower them to achieve their larger goals for climate advocacy. This week's essential topic, as you can see, is understanding our Congress, and I'm your host, Brett Cease, CCL's Volunteer and Engagement Coordinator. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Our special guest this evening, or the first one of which at least, is the wonderful Andres Jimenez. As Senior Director of Government Affairs, Andres works with both the House and the Senate to expand the voice of citizens' climate lobby, as well as push relevant legislation through. Previously, Andres served as the Associate Director of Government Relations at Ocean Conservancy, with a focus on creating bipartisan solutions for critical issues like ocean acidification and sustainable fisheries in the United States. Andres has also had a strong history of public service, having worked with former Mayor of New York City, Michael Bloomberg, the House Judiciary Immigration Subcommittee, Congresswoman Linda Sanchez, and Congressman Howard Berman. His work also includes helping green Latinos, as well as serving on the board of the Florida Ocean Alliance, where he represented the issues of Ocean Conservancy. So you can hear we have a very well-qualified presenter tonight. Thank you so much for making time to join us, Andres. At the end of tonight, everyone should walk away feeling more aware of what a typical day looks like for a congressional staffer, also understanding the makeup of Congress and how to best engage that congressional staff throughout the process, highlighting some of the challenges and opportunities that our elected officials face. And it bleeds over a little bit here, but you should see also preparing to use CCL's tools to be more engaged with your member of Congress. So the agenda is really straightforward. Andres is going to review membership and terminology, committees, chamber functions, and life in Congress. And then we'll do a Q&A discussion followed by our partner activity after a final wrap up for Andres. So I'll get out of the way and it's all yours, Andres. Thanks again.
All right. Again, thank you, Brett. That's fantastic. And welcome everyone tonight. Basics of U.S. Congress and terminology. So when we say Congress member, it usually refers to a member of the United States House of Representatives. A senator, obviously, is the other chamber, which we're talking about the Senate. And a common term, MOC, which is used quite frequently at Citizens Climate Lobby, refers to member of Congress. So those are some quick acronyms that we use. So basics of U.S. Congress membership. So the U.S. Congress has two chambers. It's got the Senate and the House of Representatives. Each state has two senators serving 6-year terms, one representative from each district, so there's 435, and they serve 2-year terms. The number of representatives for a state is determined by the population. So we have some quick trivia here that Brett's helped assemble. So how many states have only one representative? Alaska, Delaware, Montana, North Dakota, South Dakota, Vermont, and Wyoming. So in total, there's 535 members in the United States Congress, which is fantastic that during our last June fly-in for Citizens Climate Lobby, we had approximately 500 meetings in one day. So that's actually pretty outstanding. And I've actually never heard of any other group having that many meetings in one day. So that's great. So another fun trivia question, when did Congress cap the number of representatives to 435? So the answer to this, the bill, passed the United States Congress on August 8th, 1911. So some basics of United States Congress committees. Basically, this is where the work is done. There's standing, there's select, and there's joint committees. Committees are duplicative. There's House Ways and Means on the House side, and on the Senate side, it's the Senate Finance. So you'll see that a lot, that they have mirror images of themselves. So in the House, you have one committee, and on the Senate, you will have the same committee, sometimes with a different name. Committees are going to be where It is decided which bills and resolutions move forward. First, they will go through the subcommittee process, then they'll go through the full committee process before they end up on the House floor. So basics of U.S. Congress chambers. So in the Senate, so if we were to break it up, in the Senate, committees are easily bypassed. There's more open debate, riders are introduced, there's less hierarchy. Foreign policy is more of a focus in the Senate. There's fewer committees, and floor action is as influential or greater than the committee action. Now, if you want to contrast that with the House of Representatives and their work in committees, committees consider bills, there's debate is limited, no non-germane amendments. Germane means, is it relevant? Is the language of a bill or things that are trying to be added on, are they relevant to that committee? So a lot of times what will happen during the markup process in a committee is that members of Congress will offer an amendment to a bill. Now, what happens a lot of times is that these amendments are either germane or they're not germane, meaning they're either relevant to the committee or they're not relevant. And a lot of times what members will do is they'll put in an amendment so it's read, knowing that it's not germane, just so they can have a discussion and the member of Congress can go on and talk about something that's important to him, only to later be struck down as non-germane, meaning we are not going to move forward with this amendment to this specific piece of legislation because it is not relevant to the committee in which they're meeting in. There's more hierarchy and specialization, whereas in the Senate, you have foreign policy focus. In the House, you're going to have a tax and revenue focus. There's going to be way more committees and subcommittees in the House. And in the House, committee action tends to be more influential than the floor action. In the House of Representatives, there is, both in the subcommittee and in the committee, the markup process tends to be really where the bill will be shaped and formed. Whereas in the Senate, they spend a lot more time on the floor debating this. In the House, a lot of the work is actually just done in the committee. So caucuses come when members of Congress either get together in a group or in a bipartisan way, or just a member of Congress has a very specific issue of interest, and they'll put together a caucus. So we have the Climate Solution Caucus, for example. Representative Deutsch from Florida and Representative Curbelo, also from Florida, one a Democrat and one a Republican, got together and decided that the House of Representatives needed a way to talk more about climate change issues. They needed a forum to be able to do that was past what the committees were doing. And so one way to gather members of Congress to talk about specific issues and for them to all get together and acknowledge that there are issues and problems that need to be resolved is that they form a caucus. And so they said, let's form the Climate Solutions Caucus together. Let's let it be a bipartisan caucus, and let's bring members from the House of Representatives, both Republican and Democrat, to the table and start talking about how we can have change. It's a pretty young caucus, and they've already had tons of meetings that have been open to the public. They've done a lot of closed session member-only meetings. They've done a lot of meetings for just staff. So they've done a lot. There are plenty of caucuses out there that actually are formed for the only purpose of just having a caucus, saying it's an important issue, members sign on, but they're actually not active caucuses. So you have the coffee caucus, right? They don't meet that often. They don't discuss that much. Then you have other caucuses like the Ocean Caucus or the Estuaries Caucus, which are more active. So, it depends on what the point or what the goal is with the caucuses. Some are active, some are very active, and some are just meant not to be active at all. So there's two types of offices. There's local state offices or district offices as they're known, and then there's the Washington, D.C. office. The district office will always be more focused on constituent concerns, concerns back home. They help manage local events. They help with constituents when they have problems back in their specific district. Whereas in DC, these offices are going to be focusing almost solely on the legislative side. So it's what bills are coming up, what bills should their boss co-sponsor? Are they talking on the floor? Are they giving floor remarks or floor speeches, and what does that look like? So it's two very different offices. One dealing with back home issues specifically on the ground, one dealing with a broader, more overall DC passing legislation focus. Offices are like small independent businesses. Their staff distribution varies. They have their own budgets. The House has 1.4 million in their revenue. The Senate varies. Usually Senate offices, obviously because they're dealing with the entire state, are going to have a much bigger budget, much bigger staff. The staff is going to be paid more. Those are some differences there. Congressional offices do their own hiring, their own purchasing, and act as customer service. Okay, basics of U.S. Congress DC office. So let's go through the roles of the DC office. So let's start from the bottom up. So you have your schedulers. Every office has a scheduler that helps keep the congressman's appointments in DC and back in the district. He helps schedule meetings with outside groups, with other members of Congress, with committee staff. Then you have your staff assistant. That's going to be basically an entry-level position in which that staffer is getting very familiar with the legislative process and is helping with all sorts of requests, such as tour requests, flag requests. So that means flying a flag on the Capitol. They're going to give tours. They're going to be that first person you see when you walk into the office smiling at you. You'll have legislative correspondence. They do all the mail. So it used to be that they were the ones who received those huge packets of letters, and they would go through each letter one by one and make sure that they had the address correct and that they were writing everything down. Nowadays, most of it, not all of it, most of it comes in electronically. So it's been much easier for legislative correspondence to get back to constituents, and also a lot quicker. Legislative assistants, now they're handling policy on a daily level and trying to figure out what bills should the member of Congress get on, what groups are coming in. They're meeting with different groups, trying to figure out what their issues are and how they can work with the congressional office. The legislative director is overseeing the entire office. So he or she is figuring out what jobs the legislative assistant's doing. They're making sure that legislative correspondence sending out mail. They're making sure that the staff assistant is learning and doing their job, and they're working with the scheduler to keep the member of Congress up to speed and up to date. And then you have the chief of staff. The chief of staff is going to be doing more of the political thinking instead of the policy thinking like the legislative director will be doing. So they're going to be looking at bigger picture, how the campaign should run, which committees should the members sit on, what actual bills or policy, more specifically policy, should the member align himself with, which members should he or she align themselves with. So that's some more general, bigger picture thinking with the chief of staff. So the staffers usually work between 50 and 70 hours a week. It's really fast paced. They work in cramped conditions. They rarely, almost never have individual offices except for the chief of staff. They all sit next to each other in cubicles. By law, the number of House staffers has not changed since the 70s. In the last decade, each office has received between a 200 to 1,000 increase in constituent mail. So if you imagine the life of a legislative correspondent receiving that kind of mail and needing to pump that back out because they need to keep the constituents up to date, they need to respond to constituents who are voting for their boss in or out of office. So it's a very important role. The average age of a legislative assistant is only 27 years, and then they're the ones usually handling most of the workload for their boss and giving recommendations on what legislation to either jump on, write, or not be part of. So in this final slide of what's life for a member of Congress, there's an average 13 meetings a day, 70 hours a week in sessions, 78% spend more than 40 weekends a year in district, and 35% of time spent in legislation. So that's a lot of time. When a member is not working in DC, they are working back in the district. When they're not working either in the district or in DC, they're on a plane or car or train on the way back to their either district or their DC office. So it's a very hectic lifestyle and very few breaks in between. And then you have, for members, House members, you have a race constantly. So that means fundraising and campaigning and getting ready for the next election. It can be very stressful.
I've just got two other resources I want to highlight, and one of which, just transitioning from this slide, if you note the very bottom here, Congressional Management Foundation is a wonderful resource, and they've highlighted here the importance of building your relationship with your member. They found in a recent poll, if, again, asking members of Congress and their staffer, if your member or senator hasn't already arrived at a firm decision on an issue, how much influence might the following advocacy strategies directed to the Washington office have on their decision? You can see that over 97% in sum total, between very much so and slightly or somewhat so, have rated the highest, most impactful influencing is in-person issue visits from constituents like you and I. So if you're interested in finding out more about the resources that Congressional Management Foundation provides, we have a whole host of those in our community intranet for volunteers. I just put a link to the main page in the chat window. And Congressional Management Foundation is essentially a nonprofit that advances the goal of building trust in an effective and responsive Congress by working directly with members of Congress and staff to enhance their operations, and directly with citizen groups to educate them on how Congress works, giving us a stronger voice in policy outcomes. The results that they help empower are more accountability, transparency, and effectiveness, and us as an informed citizenry with greater trust in our democratic institutions. So feel free to follow along with those information. I'll just give you a quick highlight. If you were to go to community, again on that link I showed, you can find out some of these reports really lead to the following findings. For example, there's one that they have on the untapped power of constituent engagement. And some of the highlights from that study include finding that direct constituent interactions, like I've highlighted, influence or have more influence on lawmakers' decision than any other advocacy strategy. Congress places a high value on groups and citizens who have built relationships with the legislator and staff, as Andres has highlighted. Citizen advocates are more influential and contribute to better public policy when they provide personalized and local information to Congress, and we highlight how to do that in other webinars we provide. And that citizens, lastly, have significant potential to enhance their advocacy skills and influence Congress. You and I, we don't have to be trained expert or lobbyists on the Hill like Andres is day in and day out to still be effective. That's why we have the wonderful days of our conferences in June and November, and a lot more details can be found on these reports. I'll close by just highlighting this, and then we'll pass the baton to our guest speaker and Andres to have a bit of Q&A back and forth with the rest of your excellent questions. If you're looking for more depth, one wonderful resource that I'll also just put in the chat window here is a guideline, an infographic really, that Politico and their pro team have put together that shows the whole legislative process traced out visually on both the House side and the Senate side and the steps in that process. You can kind of think of it as Schoolhouse Rocks on steroids. You are more than welcome to use our tools in community. I've put them linked in the chat room. You can click on the Take Action Center in community and then write or email Congress or Call Congress, and each of these has automated tools that'll look up your geographic information and connect you to your member of Congress immediately, making it remarkably easy to connect and make your voice heard, as we've highlighted and Jake has testified tonight. Andres, I'll pass it to you for this final slide of some of your information that you would recommend as final tips. I know we're past the top of the hour, so if folks have to drop off, don't feel like you have to stay on. But here's just one last slide to consider, and then we'll close with where to find out the recording.
Yeah, I'll run through this pretty quick. So contacting your member of Congress is a wrap-up. So the importance of personalized communication, I think we talked about that, about reaching out, the importance of letting your member know that either you are in their district or their state and which group, such as CCL, you're a part of, and letting them know that you're organized, you're organizing, and you are going to hold them accountable for how they vote. Stay away from form letters. That's going back to the idea that slow and steady wins the race over just one big hit. Trust me, sending letters or calling constantly, even if it's not 100 letters and it's just a few letters, goes much, much farther than if you just do one big hit of like 40 letters in a year and then they never hear from you again. So the whole point of that is just keep pounding, keep at them. They'll be listening. Be respectful of staff members' time. Don't forget that they have usually at least 6 meetings a day, not to mention they have work for their boss. So if they say, hey, well, I'm sorry, I only have 10 or 15 minutes today, doesn't always mean it's about you personally. It's just that things come up and they have only a limited time each day to do what they need to do. Be aware of other issues that they're responding to, tailor your type of communication for your goal. So again, if you're coming in and you want to talk about the impacts of climate change to health issues or national security, or you want to talk specifically about carbon, make sure that your messaging is on point and it's focused and it's clear and concise, and you have no more than 3 talking points where you're going to lose staffers' attention. We can talk about that much further in more detail if you feel like emailing, or Brett, if you want to do another kind of talk like this where we go much deeper into a deeper dive on that issue. Work with your liaison for proper chain of command. Again, that goes back to talking about is you're working with a legislative assistant or a legislative director. Make sure to continue to work with that staff, or don't try to go around them and try to jump over because they're not kind of listening or getting the point that you're doing. You're going to have to continue to work with that staff, or the worst thing you can do is try to go around them. Then they all find out that you're trying to do that, and then you lose all your credibility in that office. Be prepared to cultivate relationships, but understand that limitations of DC, of staff in DC and in district. At the end of the day, we're all human and we're all working on things as best we can. So I think that remaining patient patience is a virtue for a reason. So stay patient and stay focused.
And you can get a hold of Andres or I here. Our emails are in the chat window. We'd love to be in touch, but I'd love to close by just saying thank you to all of you on the line tonight. It is because of your involvement day in and day out that we are making progress and moving forward on this issue. And we truly appreciate your engagement, your time tonight, and we hope that this lesson was useful. Have a wonderful evening, and feel free to reach out with any questions, commentary, you name it.